Hey homesteaders, welcome to another Sunday session of the Australian Homesteaders podcast, where we have conversations with Australian homesteaders about the experience of homesteading in Australia. We stream these live into the Australian Homesteaders Community Facebook group most Sundays, so you get exclusive early access to the full discussion and the opportunity to ask questions if you're following along. And then the following Friday, it's uploaded as a video podcast on our YouTube channel, also called Australian Homesteaders. I'm your host, Amanda from Rockpile Off-Grid Homestead and the founder of this group. And today's chat is about the Aussie mountain homestead with a tiny 100-day growing season with Rebecca from Two Tree Hill Farm. So Two Tree Hill Farm is home to Rebecca and husband, along with their two teenage boys. Their journey started on an 850 square metre block in Canberra and is now continuing onto their 115 acre property in the Tinderry Mountains in New South Wales. After being given a life-altering diagnosis in 2018, Rebecca was determined to provide her family with the best nutrition possible. In one weekend, she went out, bought some raised garden beds, soil, vegetable seedlings, and thus began her love affair with homegrown goodness. Rebecca found growing and having her hands in the soil to be very therapeutic and was surprised at how much she could grow in a suburban backyard. They added more beds, then fruit trees, berries, then quails. And in 2021, Rebecca grew over 90 kilos of produce for her family from that suburban garden. Seeking not just to grow, but to better the soil and the nutrients in it, Rebecca started learning about and applying permaculture principles and striving for a nutritional closed circuit. The next was to do it on a larger scale, and they started to look for property, something which her and her husband had dreamed of for over 20 years. It took them over a year to find the right place before they moved to their mountaintop retreat. Their ultimate goal is to produce at least 70% of what they eat, veggies, meat and dairy, over the next 4 to 5 years. And they would also love to turn it into a working regenerative farm based on permaculture, hold tours, and host long table lunches using local produce. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Did I cover everything? Anything critical I missed there?
No, that sounds good.
Okay. So, all right, let me start by asking, can you tell me about that period of time when you had that big mental shift towards wanting more nutritionally dense food for your family, if you don't mind talking about it?
Sure, yeah, that's fine. So late 2018, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it was just this big mental shift of what can I do to keep myself from going inwards and to really give myself something to occupy my mind with, and especially pass time with. And I found growing anything, you started small and went big, and there was this real passing of time, and you knew that time was passing, and you knew that sort of as that time passed, you were growing as well and shifting in your mindset. And I'd picked vegetables because I thought there was that real sense of going from something small to getting something out of it. And I didn't even begin to fathom how much that would change our lives as a family as well. So eating my first ripe tomato off my bush was just this mind-blowing experience. I'd never had anything like that before. And it really pushed me to think, what is it that we're being offered in the supermarkets? What is it that is being offered to us that is, why is it so different to what I'm getting out of my garden? And it was that mental shift of, well, something is better when it comes homegrown.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of people listening that at some point they're gardeners as well, and they've had that question and they've had that mental shift and seeking more nutrients and just going, oh, what can I get out of my garden? Like, it tastes different, it lasts longer. Oh my God, like lettuce from the supermarket it's mushy in a couple of days, and then I got a lettuce out of my garden and 6 weeks later it's still crisp. I'm like, I didn't even know lettuce was meant to like survive that. And I'm
That's
just
right.
like,
You sort of, you don't know what exists beyond the supermarket, and what
yes,
your perception of what food should be as well.
yeah, exactly. All right. So that started your shift. You were gardening in your suburban block. You had interest in permaculture. You were creating this closed circuit system. There's lots of people, and you said you and your husband had been dreaming for 20 years of having a big property, more land. And I'm sure there's lots of people listening that are either in that dreaming stage or they're in that first handful of years on their property, both of which are intense learning periods. So can you tell us about that transition from the 850 square metre block to the 150 acres? Like, what did you do beforehand to prepare yourselves, and did you feel prepared once you got there?
I think we just jumped. Like, it was just one of those opportunities. We'd been looking for probably we knew we wanted something to happen for about 5 years. Our ultimate destination was the Tinderry Mountains in Victoria, but we got the opportunity to look further, well, closer to Canberra, but further out of that main city of Canberra, but still close enough to keep all of our family connections, the school connections and the community connections that we'd made, which in the end became very important to us. So we sort of broadened a little bit out of Canberra and came across this mountaintop community. And the first time I made that drive to see this house, I wondered why on earth we had bought it. It was this scary mountaintop drive on a dirt road with sort of sheer cliff faces. And I'm thinking, am I going to be able to drive this every single day? But in terms of preparation, we really just jumped. We thought this is something that we'd known we wanted to do for a really long time. And we'd been in the planning stages of what would we do if this happened, what would we want if this happened. So we had this list of things already that we knew we wanted to get started as soon as we moved in. It was middle of autumn when we moved here, so the weather was already starting to get a little bit chilly, and I knew that all I could really do for the next 6 months was just watch and see what happened. And it was this just sitting and watching and seeing where the water ran when it rained, what that sort of weather was doing coming into winter, and how winter came so quickly, much quicker than we experienced in Canberra, which was another huge learning curve. But yeah, I think it was just this mindset of, we've been given this opportunity, let's just take it.
Also, okay, so I'm curious, you had a list of things that you were looking for.
Yep.
I'd love you to expand on that list if you could.
Yep, that's fine. My husband had 3. So he wanted quiet. We wanted to be outside of suburbia, far enough away that we couldn't hear roads or see people. We wanted it to be at least 5 acres of land that we could work on, and he wanted mountaintop views, and he wanted it to be dark. So apparently it's dark enough that just behind us is Australia's highest observatory. So he got that. We've got 270 degrees view of mountains, so he got that. And it's so quiet, like we can't hear the roads at all, and that's wonderful. We knew that we wanted enough space to put animals if we got animals. We were so blessed when we moved in here that there was already a greenhouse built. There was also already a designated vegetable patch, and we just needed to use that in how we wanted to. Sorry,
That's okay.
My dog is visiting.
Oh, hello.
And just use
he's
that
beautiful.
Yes, this is
Hello.
Benedict. Hello, darling.
Oh, Benedict's gorgeous. I've
Um,
had brindle mastiffs in the past, and he looks
darling.
like just like
Yep,
one of mine.
yep. So I mean, for us, about a good 100 acres are forest areas. So we've got
Oh
alpine
wow,
eucalypt
okay.
forest all
Yep.
around us. And probably about 5 acres of the land has been cleared for house, garden, and just house paddocks and whatnot. And the rest is just not unusable, but forest that's probably a bit too thick to be farming in at the moment, at least. So we were able to jump in and make the veggie beds in the veggie garden and try and put the greenhouse to good use. And I think my list of things was arm length when I realized that I could not do all of these things when I wanted them done. And I just had to really focus what were our priorities. And our priority was get that veggie garden up and running straight away.
Okay, we'll go into that in a second. I just want to circle back, and you talked about how you've gotten there and you're spending time observing, and that's a core principle, permaculture principle as well, is that observation period. And it really does take, like they say, at least a year, but honestly, like it can be many years before you really get into the groove of your property if you've got a decent amount of land. Even a 5-acre block is because we moved from the suburbs to a 5-acre block first before we moved to our current one, which is 100 acres. But even that expands your mind in regards to how vulnerable the land is to the elements, and being really aware of the weather and the temperature and the rain and everything. And I must have just not have barely thought about that stuff before when you're living in suburbia, because you're so protected. So that observation point is really key, and it goes along really well with your following the principles of permaculture. I'd love to touch on the climate, because one of the things that you're high up, you've got a high elevation, is it over 1,300 meters? Is that correct?
Correct.
So you've got it's a mountain type, high elevation. What did you observe in that? You're within like the first year or so of being there, haven't you? So tell me about what you've observed so far, and how that first foray into getting your veggie garden when it turned out for you.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, being in suburbia, even though you are protected, we were quite open to the wind, and we had lots of huge established trees in our garden. And I can remember when it would get windy that my anxiety would bubble over, and I was just so stressed and so anxious. And I thought, moving out here where there's not a tree sort of within 100 meters of the property, that the wind wouldn't bother me. I was very wrong. The wind still bothers me. And because we are on that mountaintop and the wind pretty much comes from the west, it comes with a vengeance, because we are sitting on the western face of the mountain. And the first thing I noticed was how windy it got and how cold that wind was. It wasn't a nice summer breeze. Even at 5 kilometers an hour, the wind can drop the temperature a significant amount. So it was thinking, what can I do to protect the vegetable garden, which also sits on that western face? What can I do to protect the house, in the sense of how can I slow this wind down before it hits the house? I'm still getting there. I have not got an answer to all of those questions yet, but how to put windbreaks up to stop that wind from being just that nasty, horrible, coming off the mountain snow winds, even in the middle of summer. So that was the one point that I noticed. The second was, I think I've mentioned, winter came quickly. So we were already having frosts when we moved in at the beginning of May, and I've been told it's even snowed on Christmas. So it comes quickly and it stays for a long time. So there is a very short growing season, and growing effectively was one of my plans, which I'm still learning because I haven't got it yet. Snow was new to the mix. So apparently a couple of years we can get a dumping of a few feet, and we've already had one of those this year, which took us a bit by surprise. But most of the other times it's just a bit of a dusting of snow. And from what my neighbours have said, we get on average between 700 to 800 mils of rain. So it really was just watching the weather, watching the seasons. They're very different to Canberra, which is only 50 minutes away. So it was a huge learning curve in just sitting and watching and observing and seeing what this land did in the weather.
You brought up, you mentioned a couple of times about talking to your neighbours, or like apparently this happens, and that's an important thing to point out when you're going and starting up on a new property, is connecting with your neighbours and finding out about the history of like the land and the area and the climate, from sometimes decades of experience, to help speed up your understanding of what's going on. So is that something you deliberately set out to do, or did you like pop over and see them, or you just saw them kind of in passing? Like, what, how did those relationships start?
It's really interesting. I think I was talking to one of my boys' teachers about a month ago, and she hadn't known that we'd moved, and I'd sort of mentioned that we were living up in the Tinderry Mountains, and she said, "Oh, do you know these people?" And I said, "Well, actually, we bought their house." So it's a lot of people know a lot of people up here. So when we commented that we'd bought up here, a lot of people said, "Oh, we'll go and see this person," and this person ended up being our neighbour. So those connections were made pretty much straight away. And I know from the point of view from the community up here, as soon as a block goes for sale, they're always aware of who's going to be buying it, and they like to do a little bit of research into them and figure out, are they going to be riding their dirt bikes around all day, or what are they going to be doing? So we got stuck right into the community. Like even before we moved, we'd purchased the house and we'd exchanged. We hadn't settled yet, but we jumped into the events that were happening, that we knew were going to be happening with people from up here. So we got to meet them even before we had moved. And when we did, we made sure to really touch base with them and just get to know them really, really quickly. Because I think in suburbia, you can get away with not knowing your neighbours, whereas up here, where you can be cut off from community for a week or not being able to go down the mountain, it's really, I think, important to know the people around you, to call out for help or see if they need help. And we have some absolutely wonderful people up here. Like we're just so blessed to be up here with this community.
Community is important to you, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And you've mentioned when we've chatted before about the kind of contrast between this idea of self-sufficiency and community sufficiency, like community sufficient. Does this tie into like the relationships you've built with your community? Can you tell me your thoughts around that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a couple of years ago, self-sufficiency was bandied around quite a bit. And I think I jumped on that bandwagon as well, really wanting to be self-sufficient, being able to produce everything that we ate, or using everything that we had. And it wasn't until I sort of stepped back and I thought, well, hang on a minute, that's just us. What if everybody around us is trying to do that as well? How can we integrate what we're doing with the other people around us? And in terms of self-sufficiency now, for me, it is, what can I do on my property with what I have? So, for example, When we first got here, our first priority was to set up the vegetable garden, and I made the mistake of bringing in soil from a local landscaping place without testing it, and it was just an enormous flop. It just nothing grew, all the seeds died in it, and I was so despondent, and I thought, how can I do this now then with what I have? And this whole mountainside was cleared about 1990, I think it was, and just left. So the valley on our property has this rich, beautiful loamy soil with some really nice clay in it. And I thought, how can I use that in my veggie garden? And it's not easy. It's a 4-wheel drive trip down to the bottom of our property to dig up out of the dam walls and widen our dam. But it's that sense of how can I use what I have without having to bring things in. So compost and adding nutrients to that soil became really important. So we added more compost bays. We got chickens, not only for the eggs, but for the manure. And our friends own an alpaca farm down the hill, and we often go and get that manure as well. Knowing that we can supply the nutrients in the soil with what we've got up here without really having to go out and purchase anything. Things also like seed saving. I'm trying to become very self-sufficient with my seed saving, knowing that what I've grown up here, the seeds will be more adapted to our climate and hopefully go better. But in that sense of community sufficiency, my neighbours have been up here for 35 years. So they know the ins and outs of growing and hunting and whatnot, and how can I help them and how can they help me in all of our journeys as well. And I'm certain that there are things that they grow better than I can, and a lot of my neighbours don't have eggs, so I supply them with eggs. A lady across the way is really good with cuttings, so if I give her a couple of dozen eggs, she'll give me some cuttings of her herbs, things that I can't do. I'm hopeless at establishing cuttings, so I leave that to somebody who knows how to do it, while I can help her in certain ways as well.
That's just such a perfect principle, and even more critical in in general, it's a great idea, but even more critical in your environment that has got a challenging climate. So let's touch back on that, to that first garden, veggie garden you put in, and just, tell me about that massive learning curve, and, dealing with, give me an overview of what the climate is kind of like, what the weather's kind of like, and then that first experience and the learning curve that you had to go through.
Sure. Well, I took what I'd known from gardening in Canberra. That was sort of my only real knowledge. And I took that, and I knew that in terms of the timing of planting, so we're always told in Canberra not to plant your tomatoes until Melbourne Cup Day. And I kind of thought that might kind of be the same. So during July and August, I was planting my seeds to hopefully get them old enough to put them out in November. November came, I put them out. A month later, we had a frost. So it was that just blew my mind. How can I have a frost 5 days before Christmas that wipes out all of my summer vegetables? So that took me back to the drawing board of, what am I going to grow out here? Our whole goal was to grow 70% of what we eat. How can I do that if I can't grow tomatoes, if I can't grow potatoes, pumpkins, if I can't grow zucchinis? How's that going to work? And then it was just this massive shift of, okay, we're going to have to put things in place that either extend our growing season, like using the greenhouse effectively, or what we ended up doing very quickly was just saying those things can't be grown here. we're going to grow them at my mother's down in Canberra. So, and we were really lucky in that sense to still have those connections in a growing climate that could actually grow tomatoes, because that's my big crop. That's my money crop, harvesting and preserving tomatoes for the full year if I can. So planting, even carrots didn't come up in the soil that I'd purchased. So it was that real mind shift of, it was really despondent. How are we going to do this? The garden isn't working, the climate is working, or the weather is working against us. What do we need to do now to actually achieve this goal that we've had? And it has been hard work. Like, we filled up our first garden bed with the soil from our valley, and within a month it was green, it was lush, it was growing, and it was just so interesting to see this particular change. Like, this is just soil that's been sitting there for 30 years, and it had those nutrients already. It had that ability to hold water and deliver all the things that the plants needed to it. But we're still learning, we're still going, and I've found that anything winter related will grow all year up here. So we've been having broccoli and cauliflower and peas all year, which has been fantastic. Potatoes grow really well up here, but everything else is either grown in the greenhouse or down at my parents' place in Canberra.
How is the greenhouse going? Like, is it, do you use that all year round, or have you only just started using that? What's the greenhouse situation?
Yeah, we're still in the process of setting it up. So we've decided to do a huge refurbish of it. So we've put in garden beds, and we're still in the process of filling it up with soil. So every time we go down, we bring a couple of bucket loads up to put in. So we haven't actually put anything in there yet, but I'm hoping to harden a few seedlings off. We have rats in there, which I don't really want to put all my precious seedlings out in the greenhouse and have them decimated by rats. So it's just making it rat proof as to the best that we can, and filling it up with soil. And I'm hoping that by September that will be done, and we can at least start growing some more winter veggies in it before we put our summer veggies out in it, hopefully by November.
Is the I do want to say there's like quite a few people have mentioned on the page that they have issues with rats, so you might want to go for a search through the post to see if there's any advice around that. Are they native rats, or are they like rattus rats?
They're rattus, yes.
Okay.
We do have native rats around, but they tend to live sort of more in the bush, whereas these guys, they're everywhere.
Do you think that the greenhouse, once it's operational, will be able to stand in for the stuff that you've been growing kind of down at your mum's house?
Yep, I think so. From what our neighbours are doing, both of them that I know quite well have greenhouses, and they use them the way that I'd like to be able to use mine. And they, across the way, the lady was growing tomatoes all through winter. So she has a fantastic greenhouse, and if I can get mine up and running like that, that would be great as well.
And it's so great to be able to see examples of, okay, this can actually work here, this grows here, and this is how it's done. And again, there's that community connection, which is fantastic. And I mean, you probably would have noticed, but I'm consistently like encouraging people in the group to, even though we're a national group, all you Australian homesteaders out there, find ways to connect with people that are kind of in your region, similar climate, that sort of, like, make connections so you can connect locally and take action locally as well. And you've got those connections with people, because it's a few people have said they love the idea of the community sufficiency, and the building of community is it's definitely so important, because I think yes, self-sufficiency is something, it's like a term that has been bandied around, but I think some people, like, it doesn't have to be isolated. You don't have to be in isolation to be self-sufficient. It's sort of being self-sufficient enough for yourself, but there's going to be those parameters that you can share that abundance on, and other people can share abundance with you. And like you said, not everybody does everything. Not everybody's good at everything, right?
That's right.
Okay. All right. So a few people have said, imagine having snow at Christmas. It would be magical. I couldn't, in Australia, I can't even fathom it. Right. Can't even fathom. Someone else said winter veg all year round would be amazing. And gotta love those potato plants.
Great.
Yeah, a few people are saying it'd be great to have winter vegetables all year round.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, Canberra got hot in summer, and up here, I think our highest temperature in the year that we've been up here has been 30 degrees, and that's a hot day for up here. And even so, talking about the climate, I asked my husband, Amanda's going to ask me about the climate. What is it? And he said, oh, it's a strange mix of alpine and coastal, because as the crow flies, we are 70 kilometers from the ocean. And we often get sea breezes and sea mists. Like, you can walk out and you're on top of this mountain and you can smell the ocean. So even on that 30-degree day, it only felt like 25 degrees because we get this breeze right off the ocean. So even that was a huge learning curve as well. And saying, well, actually brassicas grow really well when it's 25 degrees. Tomatoes not so much, but brassicas grow really well. So planting our veggie full of all the kale and the broccoli and the spinach and the cauliflower has, for my heart at least, been good to see something grow.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. So you're figuring out the veggie thing, and we'll come back to that, because I'm interested to find out if your kind of veggie garden beds plans have changed through your learning experience. But I want to touch on, it's not just vegetables you want to be self-sufficient in to be able to supply for your family. It's dairy and it's meat. What are your plans around that? Or have you already started doing stuff around that? And what allowances are you making for the snow and the climate and the conditions there?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so the first thing that we added to our homestead was chickens, and we got 6 chickens and a rooster. And we knew that as a family of 4, we probably wouldn't go through 6 chickens worth of eggs. And our purpose was to be able to preserve those eggs in the high season of laying for times like now in autumn and in winter, when the chickens really start to slow down. So we started water glassing our eggs in about January this year. In the really peak seasons, we were getting 6 eggs a day, like 3 dozen a week. And we just thought, if we preserve these eggs, then we won't need to go out and buy eggs in the autumn and the winter. So we preserved about 120, 200 eggs over the course of a few months, and we started giving it away. So all the teachers at my school received eggs, all my neighbours received eggs, my parents, my family received eggs. So it was a sense of, we don't just want to keep these eggs for ourselves, we want to be able to give it to family and friends as well. So that we are now completely and utterly self-sufficient in eggs. I haven't bought an egg for a year. So that's 2 thumbs up for me.
Can I just jump in before you go on? You mentioned water glassing eggs. So before we just move on, can you just explain what that is, and how, if someone's listening and want to try it, explain.
Sure. Well, I'm not very good at chemistry, so I just researched it, and I came across this I think it was one of the other homesteaders I follow on Instagram, and it really sort of piqued my curiosity I thought eggs just had to be eaten or stored in the fridge. I didn't know that there was this possibility to extend their shelf life. So water glassing is a mixture of calcium hydroxide, I think, with water, and it basically closes the pores of the eggs so that no bad things can get in, and you store them in this liquid for up to 12, 18 months they can be used. And watching experiments and people who'd done it, cracking a water glassed egg next to a freshly laid egg, there really wasn't much difference. There was no difference in flavour according to them. There was a slight difference in texture, but nothing sort of too out of the ordinary. And I'd found when we had quail in the peak season, I was freezing their eggs, and the defrosted texture just I did not like. So I thought I'd give this a go, and they're still sitting in the cupboard waiting for my chickens to slow down, which they're not doing just yet. So hopefully we'll crack them open in a month or so and see how they're traveling.
So you haven't tried one yet? So that was going to be my next question.
I haven't. Yeah, no, I haven't. I should have tried one this morning for my breakfast.
Okay, so I took you a bit off track there. So started with chickens, your rooster, you're all sorted with your eggs. What's next? What was next?
Yeah. So the idea behind getting the rooster was to, in time, incubate our own eggs for our meat chickens. And that was the next sort of tick off our list that we wanted, was to be sufficient in chicken meat. And chickens were easy. We had previously done a course with another farm an hour or so away that offered a course in how to butcher chickens. Wonderful. So we went along to that and learnt a few things. And we were given the opportunity in December. One of my friends called me up and said, I have too many roosters. Would you like to grow them out? So we received 13 roosters and grew them out. I think we harvested them in, I think it was the end of March this year. So that was a huge learning curve as well. We were able to go to this farm and butcher their roosters. But when it came to butchering our roosters, it was really different. Like the whole mindset of, these are our animals. We've looked after them. We've cared for them. We've fed them. We've created this bond with them. Now it's their time to serve us in that sense. And I was just really thankful that we could do that in a way that was easy on them. It wasn't traveling halfway across the continent to be butchered in an abattoir or anything like that. It was a highly emotional but highly exhilarating day as well, to be able to say we are sufficient in chicken at least until the end of winter, and hopefully I can get the confidence to dabble in hatching my own eggs and using an incubator and whatnot. So if anyone has any tips for me, that's one thing that I'm still not certain about, is how to incubate eggs, because I would again like that closed circuit of using our own rooster to be able to produce our own meat chickens as well.
I know that Honeybee Farmstead has had a series of videos going into detail as she was incubating and hatching out a couple of batches of chickens. So I might tag her in the comments at some point. She might be able to find those videos. So yeah, that would be really interesting to see just the whole process as it was happening, just the real life realities, when things went good, when things went bad, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's a great goal. What else? What was next?
So one thing that runs rampant here is deer. So it has been my desire to be able to hunt and harvest that deer off our land. And we had our neighbour's son spend a day on his property doing that, and we managed to get some of the venison from him, which was absolutely wonderful, which really set us to, we really need to get on top of this and fill our freezers with meat that is really a pest. So deer and goat are two things that we would like to be able to utilise off our land. We have a few sheep earmarked for us, which I'm hoping to bring up in spring, and they will be our source of lamb. I'd love to be able to use pigs regeneratively on the farm and sort of use their piglets. And in the long run, it has always been my goal, and it's unfortunately not going to be realised here at least, but to have a dairy cow and to be able to produce milk. And unfortunately, I don't think we have enough fodder on this property to support a cow, and I really don't want to be bringing in loads and loads of straw and grain and pellets to feed them. So my friend is just about to start breeding dairy goats. So I'm wondering whether I can get in touch with her and see if we can sort of earmark a few for us to bring up here as well.
Yeah, there's quite a few homesteaders in the group that are big proponents of dairy goats. So yeah, that's a good option. Yeah, because cows, bigger animals, they need a lot of feed. And
that's right.
Yeah, well, it's okay. So you've got things you can hunt on your property. Do you have the skills? Do you have shooting skills? Is that something you need to learn? Like
it's something,
what's your plan?
Yeah, we don't have them yet. It is something that is on our list of to do. At the moment, we're using our neighbours who already have those skills and can sort of benefit and piggyback off them as well. Hopefully within the next year, that will be a realisation for us.
All right, wonderful. Well, keen to see how that develops. All right, so you've mentioned that the chickens and you've mentioned earlier about using our alpaca poo and your soil from down below. And how is that in relation to that closed system you were striving for on your suburban block? Is that part of how it's working now? Is that working well for you? Is that like, what are the pieces of that kind of closed circuit nutrient system?
Yeah, well, we're still learning. As I said, huge learning curve on doing this from a suburban block to a bigger area. So things like the compost that we were using on our suburban block, we didn't have that massive bulk that we really needed to produce. So it is, we were able to throw our scraps in, throw the quail manure in, and we'd really get enough to suffice every 6 months of topping up beds and whatnot. But here, our garden has been a much more extensive size, and getting the bulk of compost that we would need to be able to supply it on our own, we're still getting there, which is why we often go and get alpaca poo from our friends or horse manure from another friend, and using the chicken manure that we have to bulk out that compost. At the moment, we're still in the process of, every 6 months we have enough to do something with, whether it's top up half of our veggie beds or bring in what was it, a couple of months ago, the school was mowing their lawn, and I jumped over the fence and said, hey, can I have all those lawn mowings? So it is, we're trying to keep it as closed as we can, but until we can produce enough of that, enough of the things to put in a compost, we're not quite there yet.
All right, cool. All right, so someone, Shari Rippingale, mentioned she's planning to get her gun license soon, and she also said that incubating chooks is so much fun. We usually get 100% fertility and 95% hatching rate.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's good. Someone else said they're trying to find somewhere to get milk local. I have seen a couple of people mention, I need to find that post and follow up, about like cow sharing, like getting into like a bit of a herd share. So I mean, that might be an option, so you can still get your cow milk.
Well, the ladies around us, I've spoken to them, and we've always said if we get a milk cow, we'll share it between us. So.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the learning curve. You've been faced with and overcome a number of challenges. How has that changed about how you're preparing your garden now? Like, how do you plan this?
I don't think there is a plan. I think there's a run with it, because I had all these plans. I'd grown from February all of my winter seedlings, and I was ready to put them out this week. And yesterday I came out to a very heavy frost and frozen ground, and it's been frozen ever since. So we're getting to the point now. I was talking with another one of my neighbours, and he had said that frozen ground was common. We hadn't had it so much in the last few years because of the rain and the warmer weather. But now I'm starting to see that evidence of frozen ground. So those plans of planting them out in the veggie garden might happen. We'll see if the ground defrosts, but at the moment it is put the veggie garden to bed and we'll see you next spring. So that was a bit disappointing to sort of see that and have that happen when I had grand plans of planting my carrot seeds and some more winter veggies in there. So can't really do much about it when it's frozen solid. So
you're planning for that spring gardening, but then it's not like the spring in more temperate areas. Like you said before, you can't just like pop them out in September and it's all good until May or June the next year. Like what's your plan for maximizing that growing season, that limited growing season that you've got?
Well, definitely the greenhouse, really getting that up and running so that, yes, we might be able to plant them out in November rather than September, but having that warmth in the greenhouse to be able to do that. Sorry, my son's boiling a kettle, if you can hear that.
No, that's fine.
Oh, good. To be able to extend, I think the greenhouse is going to be an absolute must to extend, because from what the neighbours have told me, generally January and February are frost free. So that kind of gives us
generally, but not definitely by the sounds of it.
So really the greenhouse will be our extension, and just keeping up the winter veg. So planting out all of our onions and things that will store well over time. Earlier on in that spring season.
Someone in the comments has asked if you have considered cold frames to extend your growing season.
I have. So I'm still in the process of finding the plastic that I can put over the cold frames. We were going to build another greenhouse in time, and I think there was somebody on the Australian homesteading page who was putting up progress reports of theirs, and I followed them and gleaned some ideas off them. So I'm still in the process of trying to find plastic to put over as mini greenhouses for our garden beds.
I think that was Deborah Lee, if I recall correctly. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so any other things that you need to be aware of when you're managing the short growing season, or because you're still kind of in this observation period as well, aren't you?
We are. It was interesting because when we moved up here, the people that we bought the house off said tomatoes don't grow, pumpkins don't grow, corn doesn't grow, all of those long season summer vegetables really don't flourish up here. So I knew that people in North America, in Canada, they were growing things. I saw them do it. I was following them on Instagram, and I'd follow from the moment they started sowing to the moment they were harvesting. And they were harvesting beefsteak tomatoes. They were harvesting big pumpkins. So I thought, what seeds are they using? Because obviously they have a growing season very similar to me. So how are they getting these big pumpkins where I'm only told we can grow Jack B. Littles? So I did a bit of research and came across quite a number of seeds that were a shorter season growing, and I put them all in my cart, and America doesn't ship to Australia. So that was really, really disappointing, because I thought obviously America and Canada have more people living in this sort of climate than Australia does. So,
Yeah. Okay. That's
yeah,
interesting, because I remember like watching those seed halls and people saying, well, this one has got like this growing duration, and yeah, wow, that's a challenge that I never thought of. Trying to find seed suppliers in Australia that catered for the short growing season. So
yeah.
what do you think you're going to do in regards to that then?
I think probably harvesting my own seeds from having grown things up here is going to be a must, to have those adapted to our climate. And I do have a few seeds up my sleeve that are a shorter growing season that I might be able to plant up here. I haven't tried them yet. I've sort of only just come across them. So we'll experiment in that. And I think we're just going to have to stick with what grows well up here and try and outsource the rest.
Yeah, and expand that greenhouse. Shari asked, have you tried doing hay bales around the gardens, then putting windows on top? I did this in
I haven't done the
my
windows.
raised potato tower, grew potatoes through winter in northeast Victoria. And then a couple of other people are saying, hay is insulating and a great home for microbes. And when it's too old to use, you can use it in other gardens. Straw, not hay.
Yep.
So
Yes.
right.
Yeah, no, straw bales are fantastic. A part of setting up a garden here was to go straight to the straw bales, because I'd done straw bale gardening in my suburban block and that had worked really well. And I think the challenge up here is the wind. So trying to get a straw bale, even full of water, to stay standing in our wind without sort of putting stakes or supporting it in that sense. And we ended up using a lot of the straw bales that had expired after growing in them, and they're now a windbreak for our garden beds. Okay. So that's and our garden beds are full of the straw bales that have already sort of started decomposing. But I had not thought about putting windows on top of them.
Well, there we go. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that maybe I shouldn't have? Is there anything else you'd like to add? We're kind of coming to the end of our time now. That went really fast.
Yeah, it did actually. I think one of the things that's really important to me is the preservation of food, and bringing in what we grow, or as well as sort of buying things when you find them on a really good deal. So I'd found pears last week on a really good deal, and I'd made bourbon and vanilla pears this morning. So knowing that I don't have pear trees up here at the moment, but just that preserving of food to see us through this season where we're not really growing a lot. So I do a lot of dehydrating. I do a lot of water bathing with jams and chilies, chutneys and pickles. And my husband just bought me a pressure canner for our 21st wedding anniversary. So yay! So awesome. I've made a few soups. I pressure canned all the venison that we got from our neighbour. And I'm pressure canning all of my carrot crop tonight. So that's been a real extension of what we can do in preserving our food as well.
Yeah, really critical in your climate as well. Are they skills that you started teaching yourself once you started growing your own veggies? So before you got to where you are, you started learning these homesteading skills and preservation of food. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it wasn't until my grandmother never preserved. It wasn't something that we'd learnt to do. It was something I had to teach myself to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good point for anybody listening out there to start learning and doing, not just not just looking at the videos and the pictures, actually do it. Because if you learn how to do it, what you can do before you get to your property, once you get to your property, that's a whole nother learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what advice would you give someone who is just about to launch, into their first homestead, and they might be faced with an unfamiliar climate or challenging conditions. How did you keep on going when things just kept on going a bit shit?
My advice is to try everything, push the boundaries. In my veggie growing, have always been a boundary pusher. I always took that risk and planted things out earlier than I should have, and just watched the weather so that I could get a head start on the season. But have fun, because yes, it is discouraging sometimes, but getting that piece of produce, or knowing that you have set something up using your own hands and your own skills, is just, it's wonderful.
Awesome. So I think that might be a good note to end it on. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Can you let anyone watching where they can follow along with your journey? I believe you have an Instagram, and I'm not sure if you have a Facebook page. Tell us where we can find you.
Yep. So I only have the Instagram page, and it's Patch at Calabash Retreat with full stops in between. And on there, I try and post at least every couple of days things that are going on in our garden and on our property and in our lives.
Awesome. And people are saying thank you so much. That was so interesting. And and again, thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone for following along and commenting, and Rebecca, you'll be able to jump back into those comments and have a read of what everybody was saying. Thank you so much for all the information. And okay, that's great. We'll leave you guys there now, and everybody have a great Sunday. See you later.
Thank you.